My boss demoted me while I was on maternity leave, so I let him celebrate my replacement. Then made one move that got him fired. I'm 32, and before my daughter was born, I was the regional sales director at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, a growing advertising agency that specialized in digital campaigns for mid-sized businesses. I'd worked my way up from an entry-level account coordinator to director in just 4 years through sheer determination and consistently exceeding every target they set for me. My team generated over $8 million in revenue last year, and I was proud of what we'd built together. My boss Vincent had been with the company for 12 years and was the vice president of sales operations. When I first started working under him, he seemed supportive of my career ambitions and would often praise my work ethic and results during team meetings. He'd tell other managers that I was exactly the kind of driven professional the company needed, and that he expected great things from my career trajectory. But something shifted after I got married 2 years ago, and especially after I announced my pregnancy last spring. Vincent started making subtle comments about work-life balance and whether I'd be able to maintain my current level of commitment once I became a mother. He'd ask questions about my plans for childcare and whether I intended to continue traveling for client meetings after the baby arrived. I tried to address his concerns directly by explaining that I'd already arranged for excellent childcare and that I was fully committed to my career. I'd seen other women in the company successfully balance motherhood and demanding roles, so I didn't understand why Vincent seemed so worried about my ability to do the same. His responses were always polite, but I could sense his skepticism about my long-term dedication. My pregnancy went smoothly, and I worked right up until my due date in August. I'd spent months preparing for my maternity leave by documenting all my client relationships, training my temporary replacement, and creating detailed handover notes for every active project. I wanted to make sure my team could function seamlessly during my 12-week absence and that our clients wouldn't experience any disruption in service. My temporary replacement was a woman named Amanda who'd been hired as a senior account manager 6 months earlier. She was competent and enthusiastic, but relatively inexperienced compared to my 5 years of client management and team leadership. Vincent assured me that Amanda understood she was filling in temporarily and that my position would be waiting for me when I returned from leave. During my final week before maternity leave, I had extensive meetings with Amanda to review every client account and ongoing project. I introduced her to key contacts, explained each client's preferences and communication styles, and walked her through our team's processes and procedures. Vincent sat in on several of these meetings and seemed satisfied with the transition plan we'd developed. My daughter Emma was born on August 15th, and those first few weeks of motherhood were everything I'd hoped for and more challenging than I'd expected. But even during the exhausting early days, I stayed in touch with my team through occasional emails and text messages. I wanted to be available for any urgent questions while still maintaining appropriate boundaries around my leave time. Vincent would send brief updates about major client developments and team performance, but his messages became increasingly infrequent as the weeks passed. When I did hear from him, the tone seemed different, somehow more formal and distant than our previous communications. I attributed it to the natural adjustment period and figured we'd reconnect properly when I returned to work. About 6 weeks into my leave, I started noticing changes in the company's social media posts and internal newsletters. Amanda was being featured more prominently in client success stories, and her photo appeared in several marketing materials that had previously showcased my work. When I asked Vincent about it, he said they were just highlighting the team's current contributors and that it wasn't anything for me to worry about. But the signs were becoming harder to ignore. Clients started mentioning Amanda when they called with questions, and some seemed surprised when I identified myself as the regional director. A few even asked if I was still with the company, which made me realize that Amanda might be representing herself as more than just a temporary replacement. I tried to stay focused on bonding with my daughter and enjoying my maternity leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The company I'd helped build and the position I'd earned through years of hard work felt like they were slipping away while I was legally protected time off. But I told myself I was being paranoid and that everything would return to normal when I came back in November. Looking back now, I can see that Vincent had been planning this betrayal for months. Every question about my commitment, every concern about work-life balance, every suggestion that motherhood might change my priorities was laying the groundwork for what he was about to do. He'd used my pregnancy and maternity leave as an opportunity to position someone else in my role while I was unable to defend my territory. The most frustrating part was how carefully he'd orchestrated everything to appear legitimate on the surface. He could claim that business needs had changed during my absence and that organizational restructuring was a normal part of corporate operations. But I knew the truth. He'd targeted me specifically because I was a working mother, and he believed the stereotypes about women's dedication after having children. I returned from maternity leave on November 8th, excited to reconnect with my team and dive back into the work I loved. I'd arranged for excellent childcare and was mentally prepared to prove that becoming a mother had only made me more organized and motivated. I'd even prepared talking points about how to leverage my new perspective on work-life balance to better serve our family-oriented clients. But when I walked into the office that Monday morning, something felt off immediately. My nameplate had been removed from my office door, and when I tried to unlock it, my keycard didn't work. I went to reception to ask about the issue, and the receptionist looked confused, like she wasn't sure who I was or why I was there. She made a phone call and asked me to wait in the lobby. Vincent appeared 20 minutes later, looking uncomfortable and avoiding direct eye contact. He suggested we talk in a conference room rather than his office, which should have been my first warning that this wasn't going to be a normal welcome back conversation. As we walked through the office, I noticed that Amanda was sitting at my desk in my office meeting with clients I'd worked with for over 2 years. In the conference room, Vincent pulled out a folder and started talking about organizational changes that had occurred during my absence. He said the company had decided to restructure the sales department to create more specialized roles and better serve their growing client base. He spoke in corporate buzzwords about efficiency and optimization while carefully avoiding explaining what any of this meant for my position. Finally, I interrupted him and asked directly what was happening to my job. Vincent cleared his throat and said that my role as regional sales director had been eliminated, but that they had a new position available that would be perfect for my skills and experience. He slid a job description across the table for a senior account coordinator role, reporting to Amanda, who is now the regional sales director. The job he was offering me was essentially the same position I'd held for years ago when I first started climbing the corporate ladder. The salary was $30,000 less than what I'd been making, and the responsibilities were limited to basic client maintenance rather than strategy development or team leadership. Vincent presented it like he was doing me a favor by creating this opportunity rather than acknowledging that he was demoting me. I asked him to explain how my position had been eliminated when I'd been generating record revenue and receiving excellent performance reviews. Vincent said the decision had been made at the executive level based on changing business needs, and that it wasn't a reflection of my individual performance. He claimed that Amanda had proven herself during my absence and that the company wanted to maintain the momentum she'd built. When I pointed out that I'd been on legally protected maternity leave, Vincent became defensive and said the company had every right to make organizational changes during normal business operations. He insisted that gender and family status had nothing to do with the restructuring and that they were simply making decisions based on current performance and future potential. The conversation lasted over an hour as I tried to understand how a temporary replacement had become permanent while I was on protected leave. Vincent kept circling back to phrases like business necessity and performance-based decisions, but couldn't provide any concrete examples of how Amanda had outperformed me or why my role needed to be eliminated rather than returned to me. I asked to see documentation of the decision-making process, and Vincent said those discussions had happened at the executive level and weren't something he could share. When I requested copies of Amanda's performance reviews during my absence, he said that information was confidential. Everything about the conversation felt scripted, like he'd been coached on exactly what to say to avoid legal liability. The most insulting part was when Vincent suggested that this new arrangement might actually be better for me as a new mother. He said the reduced responsibilities would give me more time to focus on my family and that many women found lower stress roles more manageable after having children. He seemed to genuinely believe he was being considerate rather than discriminatory. I left that meeting feeling shell-shocked and betrayed. In 12 weeks, I'd gone from being a successful director managing a team of 8 people to being offered a coordinator position reporting to someone with half my experience. The company I'd helped build and the career I'd worked so hard to develop had been given away while I was on maternity leave. That afternoon, I had lunch with several former colleagues who filled in the details Vincent hadn't shared. Apparently, Amanda had started positioning herself as the permanent replacement within weeks of my departure. She'd been telling clients that I wasn't returning and had begun making long-term strategic decisions without consulting anyone about my eventual comeback. Vincent had been supportive of Amanda's initiatives and had even recommended her for a promotion to director level before my leave was officially over. The executive team had approved the change based on his recommendation and Amanda's apparent success managing the department. By the time I returned, the transition was already complete and irreversible. What hurt most was learning that none of my team members had been told I was coming back. They'd been instructed to treat Amanda as their permanent supervisor, and several had already started reporting to her on projects I'd initiated before my leave. The institutional knowledge and client relationships I'd spent years building had been seamlessly transferred to someone else. After the shock of my demotion wore off, I realized I needed to approach this situation strategically rather than emotionally. Vincent and the company had made what I believed was a serious legal mistake by effectively replacing me during protected maternity leave, but I needed documentation to prove it. I decided to accept the coordinator position temporarily while I gathered evidence of what had really happened. Working under Amanda was humiliating, but it also gave me access to information I wouldn't have had otherwise. I could see emails and documents that showed the timeline of decisions made during my absence. More importantly, I could observe how Vincent interacted with Amanda versus how he'd treated me before my pregnancy when I held the same role she now occupied. The contrast was stark and telling. Vincent praised Amanda's every suggestion and deferred to her judgment on decisions that he'd questioned extensively when I was in charge. He'd schedule impromptu meetings with her to discuss strategy, something he'd never done with me despite my longer tenure and proven track record. The difference in treatment was so obvious that other team members started commenting on it. The first major piece of evidence came from Amanda herself, who seemed to think we were friends and often overshared about her career trajectory. She told me that Vincent had suggested she apply for director-level positions at other companies during my second month of leave. When she expressed interest in staying at our company, he'd apparently said he could make that happen if she continued performing at her current level. I started documenting every conversation and email that revealed the timeline of my replacement. Vincent had clearly been planning to make Amanda permanent long before my 12-week leave was over, which contradicted everything he'd told me about temporary arrangements and business necessity. The evidence showed a pattern of decisions that seemed designed to push me out rather than accommodate my return. The smoking gun came when I discovered emails between Vincent and the executive team discussing my reduced commitment to the company due to new family responsibilities. These messages had been sent while I was still in my first month of leave, barely enough time to assess anyone's long-term commitment. Vincent had been speculating about my future performance based on stereotypes about working mothers rather than my actual track record. I also found documentation showing that Amanda had been given access to my client files and strategic plans weeks before Vincent claimed the restructuring had been decided. She'd been attending meetings with senior leadership about long-term departmental goals and had even been asked to present ideas for expanding our service offerings. These weren't temporary caretaker responsibilities, they were permanent leadership duties. But the most damaging evidence was a recorded conversation between Vincent and Amanda that I discovered on the shared server. They'd been discussing client strategies, and Vincent had made several comments about how much easier it was to work with someone who didn't have outside distractions affecting their priorities. He specifically mentioned that Amanda could travel and work late hours without worrying about childcare arrangements. The recording also revealed Vincent's true feelings about working mothers in general. He'd made disparaging comments about other female employees who'd taken maternity leave, saying they never returned with the same level of dedication. He'd used phrases like baby brain and suggested that women's priorities fundamentally shifted after having children in ways that made them less valuable to the company. I realized I needed professional legal advice to understand my options and ensure I was handling the evidence collection properly. I consulted with an employment attorney who specialized in discrimination cases, and she was immediately interested in my situation. She said the timeline and documentation I'd gathered suggested a clear pattern of pregnancy and maternity leave discrimination. My lawyer advised me to continue working in the coordinator role while she prepared a formal complaint. She wanted to give the company an opportunity to correct the situation voluntarily before pursuing legal action, but she also warned me that they might retaliate once they realized I was building a case against them. Sure enough, within 2 weeks of my lawyer's initial contact with their legal department, Vincent's behavior toward me became noticeably hostile. He started micromanaging my work, questioning my decisions, and generally creating a hostile work environment. He seemed to be building a case for my termination by documenting every minor mistake or delay in my performance. The irony wasn't lost on me that Vincent was now trying to prove I was incompetent in a role that was significantly below my qualifications and experience level. He was setting me up to fail by giving me inadequate resources and unrealistic deadlines, then acting surprised when I struggled to meet his expectations. But his obvious retaliation was actually helping my legal case by demonstrating the discriminatory intent behind his actions. I continued documenting everything while maintaining professional behavior and meeting all my responsibilities despite Vincent's increasingly difficult demands. My lawyer was building a comprehensive case that included not just the initial demotion, but also the ongoing retaliation and hostile work environment. Vincent had no idea that his attempts to force me out were actually strengthening my position for the eventual reckoning that was coming. During this period, I also reached out to other women in the company who'd taken maternity leave to see if they'd experienced similar treatment. What I discovered was disturbing but not surprising. Several women reported that Vincent had made comments about their reliability after returning from leave, and a few had been passed over for promotions they'd been promised before their pregnancies. 3 months into my wrongful demotion, Vincent made the mistake that would ultimately destroy his career. The company was preparing for their annual client appreciation event, a major networking opportunity that I'd organized successfully for the past 3 years. Vincent decided to put Amanda in charge of the event and publicly announced that she'd be the face of our department's client relationships going forward. The announcement was made during a company-wide meeting where Vincent praised Amanda's leadership and vision while positioning her as the future of our sales department. He talked about her innovative approaches and fresh perspective, like she'd revolutionized our operations rather than simply maintaining the systems I'd built. The entire presentation felt like a celebration of my replacement. But Vincent made a critical error during his presentation. He displayed several slides showing revenue growth and client satisfaction improvements that he attributed to Amanda's leadership. The problem was that all the data he was showcasing reflected work I'd done before my maternity leave. Amanda had simply maintained existing relationships and continued executing strategies I'd developed months earlier. More damaging was Vincent's claim that Amanda had developed several new client acquisition strategies that were generating unprecedented results. I recognized every single strategy he mentioned because I'd created them and documented them extensively in my pre-leave handover materials. Vincent was literally giving Amanda credit for my intellectual property in front of the entire company. That's when I realized Vincent had handed me the perfect opportunity to expose everything he'd done. I requested a private meeting with the CEO and head of human resources using my company's open door policy for employee concerns. I told them I had information about potential legal liability that needed immediate attention from senior leadership, In that meeting, I presented a comprehensive timeline of my demotion, along with documentation showing how Vincent had systematically replaced me during protected leave. But the most powerful evidence was the presentation he'd just given where he'd attributed my work to Amanda. I had emails and documents proving that every strategy he'd credited to her had actually been developed by me months before my leave. The CEO and HR director were visibly shocked as they reviewed the evidence. They could see that Vincent had not only violated my rights during maternity leave, but had also misrepresented facts to senior leadership about departmental performance. His presentation celebrating Amanda's innovations was actually a public admission that he'd stolen credit for my work. Within 48 hours, the company launched a full investigation into Vincent's handling of my maternity leave and return. They interviewed team members, reviewed email records, and examined the timeline of decisions made during my absence. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Vincent had systematically discriminated against me based on my pregnancy and family status. The investigation revealed that Vincent had been planning my replacement from the moment I announced my pregnancy. He'd made comments to colleagues about pregnant employees being unreliable and had specifically recruited Amanda with the intention of making her my permanent replacement. Several witnesses came forward with stories about his discriminatory attitudes toward working mothers. Most damaging of all was the discovery that Vincent had lied to the executive team about my performance and commitment level to justify the restructuring. He'd presented speculation and stereotypes as fact while withholding information about my actual track record and client relationships. His deception had influenced major business decisions and exposed the company to significant legal liability. 2 weeks after my meeting with leadership, Vincent was terminated for discrimination, retaliation, and misrepresentation of employee performance. The company also announced that they were conducting a comprehensive review of all personnel decisions made during employees' protected leave to ensure no other violations had occurred. I was immediately restored to my position as regional sales director with full back pay and benefits for the period I'd been wrongfully demoted. Amanda was transferred to a different department where she could develop her skills without benefiting from the inappropriate circumstances of her promotion. The company also implemented new policies to protect employees during family leave and prevent similar situations in the future. The annual client event that Vincent had planned as Amanda's debut became my triumphant return to leadership. Several clients mentioned how glad they were to see me back and how much they'd missed working with me during my absence. It was clear that Amanda had been competent, but hadn't replicated the relationships and trust I'd built over years of dedicated service. 6 months later, I received a promotion to Vice President of Sales Operations, Vincent's former position. The CEO said they needed someone with proven integrity and leadership skills to rebuild trust in the department. My experience fighting for my rights had actually demonstrated exactly the kind of principled leadership they wanted in senior management. Looking back, I'm grateful that Vincent's arrogance led him to publicly claim credit for my work. If he'd been more subtle about the discrimination, I might never have had the clear evidence needed to expose his behavior. His need to celebrate Amanda's success became the very thing that revealed his lies and ended his career. Today, I lead a department that truly supports working parents, and I've become a mentor for other women navigating career challenges around family planning. Vincent's betrayal was devastating at the time, but ultimately led me to a better position and the satisfaction of knowing that no other employee will suffer the same discrimination under my leadership.